Do you need that one closer to you?
Good morning and welcome to the Yountville Town Council special meeting for our budget workshop today on May 8th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Durham?
Here.
Councilmember Dorman? Here. Councilmember Moeller?
Here.
Mayor Dunbar?
Here.
Please let the record reflect that Vice Mayor Dornbecker is excused today.
Thank you. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Adoption of agenda. Is there a motion to adopt today's budget workshop agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Public comment. Is there any member of the public like to address the council on something not on today's agenda? Seeing no one, move right ahead to item 6A, the first of our series of workshop items. Maria.
Great. Well, thank you and good morning. Thanks for being here. It's always so exciting to get together and go over these items and have a chance to brief you on our budget. As our town manager mentioned, we did attempt to do an abbreviated version, and so it's the same number of slides as last year, but you're getting every general fund department, which is a pretty good win for us, we think. So we hope that you'll find this useful and informative, and with that, I will start. So we're here to cover our budget, and I want to give you some information that may help as we think about everybody's budget that you're going to hear today. So PERS is something, these are all, on the slide you'll see items that impact every single budget line item. And so I just want to let you know what they are up front so that the department directors don't have to repeat themselves multiple times. So PERS, as you know, and we've talked multiple times, PERS is a expense that we have associated with our benefits for salaries and payroll. And so one of the things that affects the town is the tiers that they're in, that the employees are in. And so right now our employee population has 14 employees in tier 1, 5 employees in tier 2, and 11 employees in tier 3. And so overall, this tier 3 is what's really going to help our long-term costs for PERS. And so we're kind of at a 50-50 split. So we also have the PERS unfunded actuarially accrued liability, which is the additional bill that we receive from PERS annually, which we pay once. It's allocated to every department. That bill alone is this year representing 48% of our total PERS costs. Overall, PERS costs have increased approximately 9%, and it represents 20% of total payroll, and total payroll is about $3.1 million. So aside from that, the other elements driving this budget are the MOU increases of 3.5% and also an increase in vision reimbursement from $400 to $500 annually per employee. There's also an increase for health insurance premiums projected at 9%. We're expecting to continue funding OPEB at the full ARC amount. The last study we had advised us to fund it at 14.5%. We do have a study underway right now, and so that may need to shift, but for now we're using the same variable we have in place. We also, one of the changes that you'll see in the departments, it's small, but it can look different if you're really looking at the detail of the departments. We changed the allocation of vision, cell phone, boots, and gym reimbursements to the main departments to improve accuracy. What we were literally doing before was splitting these small amounts based on where every employee was assigned to, and it was causing a lot of manual entries, and it was just silly. So you'll see a larger roll-up cost in a main department, mostly in the administration department, just to cover the costs in one place. Really improves data entry and accuracy when we pay these things out and when we track them in payroll, just to improve our processes in-house. And then also we updated our IT allocations. IT is allocated to each department based on the number of devices. So we counted our equipment pieces, we counted what we're going to be buying, and we updated that. So you'll see some increases there. All right, so the first piece of really excellent news is that we are bringing you today a fully balanced budget. And so if the world was ending right now, I would tell you this and you'd be so happy. So we're totally balanced. So the first line on the farthest right-hand column provides you our proposed budget, which we have a beginning fund balance of $8 million. We expect to receive next year $10.6 million. We expect to spend a little over $9 million. And then the revenue remaining is obviously total revenue minus expenditures is $1.5 million, a little bit more than that. Okay, so this is a portion of a slide of a sheet that you receive is really in three major sections. And to make it more palatable for you, I've broken it up in three parts. The first part was the last slide we just talked about. This is the next slide. After we look at all of our revenues and expenditures, we do have transfers that our general fund sends to different divisions or departments. So as you can see, we have all of the transfers to cover our responsibility to pay for retiree health insurance. We have the allocation to cover the PERS unfunded actuarially accrued liability, which I mentioned. We've got a facilities repair and replacement fund and a fleet tools and equipment replacement fund, which was approved by the council last year. And we're proposing an allocation based on the needs and replacement plans for the future. And then we've got a little bit of revenue that comes in from our TID. That's our administration fee that comes in. We've got the payments for our debt for 2013 and 2017 lease revenue bonds. And then we've got the subsidies, which we approved recently, that are proposed for water and wastewater for the low income. And so that gives you a net transfers of $1.4 million, leaving the excess still of $130,000. So this is an area of importance to the town. I've highlighted the items in yellow, which are really meaningful to us. This is where we make sure that we allocate for all of our reserves and make sure that we're prepared for any kind of emergency. So we've got a $1.8 million allocation for committed for emergencies. That is based on our town policies, and it's based on 20% of expenditures. In other years, we've tried to put in a little bit more. This year, we're at 20%, so we're meeting the policy. We've also got $240,000 for budget contingencies, $250,000 for legal contingencies, and then we've got $2 million for the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and that is funded above policy level, which is also at 20% of TOT, but we're funding it higher than that. We've got $250,000 for leave buyout should anyone leave the town and require a vacation payout. We've got that money aside so it doesn't hit any budget in particular and provide any kind of erratic swings. We've got $250,000 earmarked to transfer into the Capital Projects Fund. And then $20,000 for the workers' comp self-insurance retention, which is a change this year in how we're managing our risk management. And then the $759,500 is really just a guess placeholder. It's a complete replica of what we're doing in this year. But that whole line, which is named Assigned for Purchase Orders, is a new line to improve our transparency for you. So what we do every year, right before the year ends, is we take a look at all of the different purchase orders that you've approved throughout the year, and then others that are at the city manager level approval or just even at staff level approval. We issue purchase orders for anything above $5,000. So we review all of our open purchase orders, we meet with the departments, and we ask them, are you going to close this purchase order at the end of this year, or are you going to need to roll it over because you haven't received the goods or the services still, or the project is still in play? And so if something is still in process, it makes sense, rather than to ask you to allocate under new expenses, it makes sense to just roll over the already approved purchase order into the following year. And so the $759,500, which is really for this year, and for this current fiscal year, is for the general plan and also for the sports courts. It's a highlight. I mean, that's the highest number that we can expect it to be right now. As the year continues to move and as projects progress, that number will change. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. But this year we decided to add this line so that you can really see what's happening, just for transparency's sake. Some organizations do it, others don't. So for next year, 18-19, I just placed in there 759.5 as a worst case scenario. If that doesn't happen, and it obviously won't happen without your approval, that 759 would just roll into the next line, which is a really nice line, and it's called the unassigned fund balance. of $1.1 million. So all in all, the total of these allocations is $8.2 million, and it shows that we are well prepared and well insulated for any kind of major event for now. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it along to Michelle, who's going to cover a couple slides here related to the town council and mayor.
And Michelle, before you continue, Eddie, could you move that microphone down so that I don't have to, no, not Maria's, yours, so I'm not looking right through it at her. That's
Sorry.
great, thank you. Okay, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Let's switch glasses. So this is for town council and mayor budget. The budget shows a slight increase of 3% due to health insurance costs. And then the budget highlights are for hosting a board and commission volunteer appreciation dinner, employee appreciation event, and to conduct the annual council planning retreat and strategic plan check-in, as well as adopt the general plan. The information presented to you outlines those changes, and that concludes my report for this item.
Okay.
Open for questions.
Since we have Pam, you're the only one in the audience. If at the end of any of these sections you have a question or comment, if I don't remember to say, Pam, do you have a question or comment, just feel free to raise your hand and we can have you come on up. Any questions so far from the council? Okay.
Okay, next slide. The next item is the town clerk budget. And with that item, the total budget has been reduced by 26% due to one-time contract costs, which is associated with the electronic records project. The budget highlight will be continuing to implement that project, which is to complete development of all department file plans, develop workflows, and test the system. In addition to that, we're proposing a $29,000 for a part-time hourly employee to support the town records and information management program, and also multiple departments with documents related to the new electronic content management system. Some of those features, I've created a handout that talks about some of the items this part-time position could do. If you'd like to take a look at that, that's there. I think it's important to have that position to support and ensure the success of this program. That concludes my report on town clerk. I'm available for questions.
Yes, Councilmember
Yes.
Mueller?
I have an overall question. I think it's going to pop up throughout here regarding part-time employees. I know there's pushback, sometimes from the state about that. Are we okay? Because I certainly support having part-time positions if we can. So just where are we on that?
I think that's a great question, Councilmember Moeller, and I'll segue into three different areas because there's contract vendor positions. In this particular case, we are talking about a direct town employee part-time, keeping it under the PERS threshold. So it's the cleanest and safest of the part-time approach. And again, the council has given us very clear direction that they prefer for us to look at the alternative as opposed to full-time staff and full benefited. So this is our opportunity to do that. But this is the internal, in other words, we would recruit, hire, it would be issued, considered a town employee, but working less than 20 hours on average a week to keep it under the benefited structure, as opposed to a contracted vendor or consultant vendor like we use with, for example, Interwest, which provides our plan check and building inspection services. So I hope that.
Well, so no, I understand all those pieces, but do we anticipate pushback from the state, or is this something that they have accepted
No,
yet?
that's why I'm saying I'll be clearer. The pushback from PERS is actually related to what they consider a common law test of contract vendors. So this is why I'm saying when it's ours and it's subject to our PERS contract, it's the safest and most conservative.
All right, great.
Does this person also have lifeguard certification by any chance?
Would you like me to include that? Other duties as
Trying,
assigned.
Samantha.
Other duties as
Trying.
assigned, right? Can I add one more item that I missed?
Yes.
And I do think it is a highlight. And also the election is happening in 2018, so we'll be looking for 2 council members and a ballot measure. three council
Three-
members and a
well,
ballot measure.
Mayor,
Yes.
two council.
Yes,
and
yes, so that's important to know.
We
that
don't
that-
know all the ballot initiatives that may be on in November
That's
yet.
true, yes, yes.
We know of one that
We know of
we'll be
one.
advocating.
Yes.
which is-
Did I see a hand? Pam? You may want to sit in the front row and cut down on travel time.
Oops, I don't know.
Henry, 6887 Jefferson Street. I just have a question, since I don't know what the hierarchy of the employees.
I'm not sure that microphone's on. I hear rustling from the back room, so.
Just got to turn it on, I think.
There we go. Okay.
Pam Reeves, 6887 Jefferson Street. Since I don't know what the workings are of the town employee hierarchy, I just have a question about a part-time employee. Recently, the town switched their billing for their water bills to some outside vendor that was supposed to be without charge through the bank or something like that. And I'm wondering what responsibilities the person who used to do the billing in-house is now doing, and would that not be a possibility for someone to segue into this part-time job versus hiring another person?
I'll take the
You mean
first,
basically if that person now had extra hours that were not being
Right.
committed somewhere else? Okay. Steve?
and let me clarify, and Maria will be able to amplify. We did not reduce the billing. What we're using is West America's bank is our processing bank, and the checks are being received and processed there. So the amount of time that it offset is also currently done by a part-time employee. All of our accounting assistants are part-time. So it really didn't change the billing because they still have to be involved in processing and doing the billing. It has resulted in 2 to 3 hours a week of during a billing cycle of time just because the checks that are going in there. So that's, and we have more than enough additional work projects in terms of reporting and processing. But I think, Pam, what I appreciate is that also shows that we're looking at how to use some of the technology and services available to improve staff efficiencies and effectiveness. But the reality, for those of you that aren't familiar with the town's front office, we have no dedicated clerical and admin support. We have one shared position amongst 5 functional work areas. So we're very lean, and that's also, so most of the utility billing and processing are done by the equivalent of 3 part-time positions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I don't think 2 hours is adequate for what Michelle has planned for what we need to try to do in terms of records management. I also think it's important when we look at this, we do evaluate, and the council has been very clear that you like us to go incrementally and work. One of the things that people aren't aware of is the increasing requirements that the state has for access to data and information, Public Records Act. Also, the increased encouragement from the council for transparency in making our records available. And part of that is it just doesn't happen. You know, even with an electronic record system, somebody has to put the information into the system, management, index it, and make it so that it's accessible for both the council staff and the public that want to look at it. And I think Michelle and I are really concerned that we want to protect the investment of the council and not just have, you know, I think all of us can be familiar with the old-fashioned file cabinet that you just kind of open and put stuff in, and if you don't manage it at some point in time, you look at the file cabinet and go, and that's what we really want to avoid and do right, recognizing that, you know, this is a more efficient and effective way long-term to do the town's business.
Is that it for town clerk section? Okay.
Okay. Next section will be public educational and government access. And this item, total budget that we requested is $5,000 for unanticipated equipment failure or unplanned equipment failure. Since the production of this slide, we have learned that Granicus provides a digital server. The current server we have now is analog and was bought in 2012. This provides for the ability for our video to be streamed HD. So the cost of that is a one-time purchase that falls within the $5,000 that's allocated, so it does not change the budget allocation at this time. PEG is a restricted line item, and those funds will either be spent or remain in PEG.
Okay, questions?
Anyone wants
Councilor
to
Durham?
see us in HD,
Yeah.
but okay.
Any questions? Okay.
So now we're going to transition to Julie Baldia, and she and Steve, and Eddie, sorry, are going to cover the next few slides.
Yes, I got it. Good morning, Mayor, council members. The non-departmental budget focuses in a variety of costs that are not associated with any specific department. So just to give you an idea what that covers, it includes day-to-day office operations, the council retreat or contract with the Napa County Animal Control Shelter, and LAFCO administrative fees, and any number of agency memberships. Some of the highlights that we included here was funding that is included for the animal shelter and the Napa County Recycling Program. The budget also includes your annual retreat, and it also reflects an increase in the contingency fund, which is money that the town mayor has discretion to use in any situation that is not expected. Now, this is consistent with other any other government agencies, and the increase is a modest increase in general. Any questions?
I do have a question as it relates to, I know Councilmember Moeller, I'm not sure how frequently you need to travel, especially air travel with the LAFCO State Board. I travel more frequently now, and I don't know if I'll be successful with the appointment to the executive board in June. If I am, that's going to mean more travel as well, some of it driving, some of it air. So where are we safely handling, first, if the LAFCO coverage is there, if all of our participation in league activities is covered already, et cetera.
Let me clarify really quick. In this department budget, you have your dues associated with league and LAFCO. In the town council budget is where you have your training and travel and education budget. And I think, Mayor, Council, we've been increasing that a little bit because we do have an active council. My understanding is that in some cases, portions of your expenses are covered by the league, others will be covered by the town, and similar for Councilmember Moeller. And we'll have to keep track on that. And overall, I think we're in a good spot, but we are aware of that, and I think that's one of the reasons you saw some slight increases in that budget. But that's where you would find it in the town council budget.
So just jumping back really quickly to the town council budget, conference and travel is, looks like it's gone from 2016-17 just over 9,500, and now we're looking at 14,000. So that's
That's exactly what
adjustment. Very good.
we're matching your,
Got it covered.
all of you are more active in participating, and we encourage that as part of your education and travel.
Right. Just wanted to make sure that travel especially. Councilmember Mueller.
Just an FYI, the county pays CalAFCO expenses.
Good.
Yeah.
So even though it's the state body, we're not paying for it. I don't care who else is.
Yeah,
Frankly,
okay.
just like
It's not us,
the
county.
league
What
pays for anything I do with the state board. As
What I
well.
would say is, we pay dues. We have
Right.
a proportion of the LAFCO budget, so indirectly we are contributing, but then it's distributed in terms of their work plan. So
Right. Okay. Great. Any other questions, Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. So why are we increasing the contingency by $10,000? Because I see in 2016-17 it was 1,900. Looks like we're estimated to be at 35,187 this year. I mean, that's a dramatic jump year over year, and then another 10. What's the contingency used for, please?
all right,
I'll take responsibility for this. So I came to Steve and I said, consistent kind of with the city manager's purchase order signing authority, really, if we end up having a one-time item that you need to sign for, we should really have your contingency be on par with what your signing authority is, just for consistency's sake, because this is really at the town manager's discretion when things come up or when a department has a major need or something. And so it's just, in light of sort of things that happen in town and in the region, it's just nice to have that amount available, and it matches with his signing authority.
And more broadly to the question, we treat this very seriously as a contingency. So I only use it when we have a situation where it's not covered in another area, where it was an unplanned or we went over in a certain area. So you will very rarely see us push the 35,000. Last year is our most current year because it was not a typical year in some of the areas of where we've had some of the emergency response and some of those elements. So it's not, I don't think you should expect to see it always at 35 to 45. But again, it's one of those areas we want to be prepared, and we use it in a very discrete, limited basis. So it's not viewed to go out. But occasionally we have an item that was not anticipated when the budget was approved, or an expense that has gone over, and this is the vehicle we use to address that.
So we would expect in whatever a typical year is going to be for us, that it would be back closer to the less than 5,000 of the contingency gets used.
5 to 10 is probably a more typical range, but maybe what I would also say, some of these items that we're now starting to deal with end up potentially being more expensive. And the difference here is, it's a good clarification question. This is actually budgeted, so it's anticipated to be used if the appropriate conditions are met. As opposed to, you saw the earlier, we have an allocation of $240,000 for an annual contingency. That requires us to come back and have you take action on it. And a great example this year was, and I think in magnitude, is the emergency removal of the grandfather oak actually took almost $50,000. So you can see there that we had to cover funds in different areas because, the Public Works Parks maintenance budget does not have $50,000 worth of capacity unplanned in its budget. So that's a great illustration of where and how some of that can go. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
but really,
thank you.
I do think it's more of a procedural issue to match. And again, my hope would be that it stays in that $10,000 range, and then the money becomes reprogrammed. That becomes part of the unassigned fund balance at the end of the year.
And Maria, you picked this as opposed to representing the discretionary signing authority in the town manager's budget because you're basically leaving it here and then would assign it into whichever department it has to apply.
That's correct.
So it's not really, it represents the manager's authority, but it's not in the town manager's line item as designated contingency.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
you did that intentionally to keep it more general?
Yes, and it's also to maintain control. So if we had suggested giving a contingency to every department, then and you can, every director would have this extra contingency to use at their discretion. If something comes up, any director or staff person has to talk with the town manager, make sure that the cost is legitimate, make sure that there isn't savings somewhere else, and then
Fine.
right.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Okay, moving forward. Thank you, Eddie.
Good morning, Council, Mayor and Council. So we're going to go over the information technology budget. As you can see, the total budget is $347,700, which is an increase of 11% from last year. For information technology, any big project that comes to town, like the electronic records document system, anything IT related, last year, we did Office 365, which is currently underway. Those costs are initially charged out of the department and then roll over to IT for maintenance. So the increase in my budget is due to taking on the project Michelle is working on for the electronic records management. So we've absorbed those costs for maintenance going forward, as well as the software costs to keep going to continue our Office 365, which is an annual fee. So the budget, it really doesn't have a lot of activity going on this year. It's status quo in a sense that the IT does not have any specific projects that we are doing other than taking on the maintenance of these other projects through other departments. The allocations for these budgets are charged back to the individual departments, so based on the number of devices that are allocated to each department. So that's really it. Unless you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Councilmember Jerome?
We had talked about townwide, and I understand that it would be, this is the follow-up. Just, if you could just tell me where the townwide, I know we've talked
Wi-Fi?
about that line. Yeah, what department that would fall under
So
to start?
right now, we are actually looking at some different funding options for that. We're actually reaching out to our Tourism Improvement District for some funding allocation from that budget to see where that will go. So right now, it doesn't have a home, but it will land in IT. At the end of the day, that's where the maintenance would be.
And I'll add a little clarification. This actually has, you'll see it in your capital projects budget as a placeholder while we're looking at that. So from this standpoint, because we don't have something to maintain, it doesn't go into
Right,
IT.
but once we're done, it will land
This could be
here.
a great example because if we are successful in finding a vendor, and we are in conversations with two different approaches, and both the town and the TID potentially bring some money forward, that may be what's necessary for the initial installation, but then you're going to need to have an ongoing cost, and we'll need to have a discussion of what accessing and purchasing the internet subscription would be for that type of stuff. And as you might imagine, it's not quite the same as buying a home-based internet from Comcast when you're
We
looking
just
at
don't know
a
yet.
network. So we don't have that, but that's how it would approach. But you will find when we do the budget discussion on the 22nd, based on your CIP discussion, it is a planned identification for the capital projects plan. And I think that's also a great segue of how some of those things come in, and then software licensing. Just a general rule, what we're finding on software, a lot of times you used to buy your technology. Now most of them are coming on a annual license and subscription. So in all those transition from the initial project into IT. So that's where you'll see, if you go through the list, you know, we're buying Acela, we have Springbrook, we have
Esri.
finance, we have our GIS. All the licensing costs are principally in this budget.
Are we having that conversation countywide?
Yeah, I don't know.
There may be some coordination with, if all of us independently are trying to get townwide public access, should we be talking as a county about getting
It
it done?
doesn't work that way.
I'm
But
talking about
we're
in terms
having-
of being more attractive to a vendor if we have the entire county signing up as opposed to each individual jurisdiction.
I can explain to you, it doesn't really function that way because it really is keyed to geography and identification for the network installation and who's looking at it.
So if we have 6 different conversations going on with vendors, that's what I'm saying. I understand that each jurisdiction's unique, but if there is a cost benefit to bringing all of us
It-
on a single
Right,
vendor.
and I guess part of it would be not all of the other agencies are in a position where they're interested or have this as a project that they're working on. So, I mean, I hear your thoughts there, but in some cases where we're going, the city of Napa is looking at some different elements, and my conversations that I'm aware of, the other agencies are not right now.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. That's okay.
Okay.
Back to Eddie.
So the community promotions and programs budget provides a number of services, programs, and manages costs at a lower cost or free of charge to the residents of Yountville. And just to give you an example of those, this includes the Yountville Trolley subsidy. It includes the library services, which we contract through Napa County, and the Chamber of Commerce, who manages promotions and marketing for the town. So some of our highlights for you to know is that we are contracting a photographer because we try to maintain newer pictures that we can showcase in our promotional marketing for visitors and businesses alike. We also had an increase in the Chamber of Commerce contract, 43%, and this is as stated in the contract that we have with them. And the major change here is that the art programs fund has moved from this particular budget to Parks and Recreation. So that's why you see a large decrease in the budget from year to year.
So that explains the 50th anniversary, or not the 50th, the 4th of July fireworks would be found in that other department, for example.
No, it will come out of this one, I believe.
Well,
Am I right? Am I correct?
That comes out of the community. We've moved all of those.
Okay.
You'll find the category
Yeah.
again, but this one is the movement of the arts is just amplifying the amount of time and energy and resources in art. We have, I think 2 years ago, we created the community outreach where all of the things like the 4th of July, Yountville Days, things like that are all housed, and that'll be something Samantha will go over.
Okay. Questions? Councilmember Dorman.
Thank you. So we had talked at the last meeting about our small community projects. Is that where this funding would be?
I believe we actually, I know we added it. Maria, do you remember if it was?
It didn't look from the figures like this was where it was, so I just
No, let me,
wanted to make sure we didn't miss out on it.
we have added it. I think it could be under the community outreach budget. So I'll take a,
Let's
while
put
we
a,
move on,
let's
let
put
me,
a post-it on that and make sure we look when we get moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Just keep that in your pocket. Thanks.
So it's not. It's presently not in there, but we can add it.
In which budget would it be?
It's not in community promotions and programs presently. The 10,000 is not budgeted, but we can add it.
In what department are you saying you should, this
So,
one?
in this one that we're speaking of, 1015, the community promotion and programs, if that is where you would like to have it, so we missed it, we didn't add it, but it's, we can add it to this.
It makes sense to be in this one because we don't know what the projects are going to be, so we wouldn't want to put it in a designated
Correct.
category somewhere else.
This is, and right, so community promotion programs is kind of that broad base, right? So
Right.
one example of how the arts program evolved and really grew, and now it's fitting to move it to Park and Rec. This is kind of a similar start where you could place it in this line, in this department as a line item, and then manage it here. So we'll add that.
Good catch.
Thank you.
The happiness factor.
It went up.
Yeah.
I like it. It's good.
Is that community promotions? Are we finished with that? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are back to town manager, which is really status quo budget. Town manager will continue to implement a strategic plan and support the Envision Yountville general plan update. Otherwise, there are no significant changes at all to this budget.
Any questions? Okay.
Okay. And then risk management. So there's not a lot of changes to this as well, but the highlight that I would point out is that the workers' compensation, liability, and property insurance items are now being allocated directly to the departments and are no longer budgeted within the risk management budget. So that is a change that will reduce the amount. And then we're still including funding for all of our training and development risk management. We work with Liebert Cassidy Whitmore for any sort of employee relation issues and stuff like that. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Business interruption insurance in this category? Does
it's
that-
all in our risk
Yes.
management.
But are we going to
budget.
be impacted because we actually received that payout? Does that change our status?
Well, we will find out when we get our quote, but typically, no.
Okay.
But we did file the claim, and
Right.
I'm
Well, it paid off very
going to
appropriately,
say
which
it
is-
has. The other thing that Julie was mentioning just briefly, and then I'll just be on it, we are transitioning from a zero SAR, our self-insured retention, which functions like a deductible on our workers' comp program, to a $5,000 SAR. PARSAC is eliminating a zero, and most of that's just a zero SIR is a very unique. So what you're seeing in this year's budget is the starting of you saw the 20,000 for a workers' comp claim, so we'll be responsible for the first $5,000 of a workers' comp claim directly. There'll be no change in our program administration. It also has an initial reduction in our premium, but I just wanted to be really clear that that's a process that's underway. And then in about 2 years, I'll evaluate whether we want to go from a 5 to a 10,000, and that's just first dollar in on those types of things.
Okay. Town attorney.
Actually, they were trying to very limit how much. The town attorney
not
budget
working.
is a slight, I know, see, that was a strategy we have. And the town attorney's budget is increased 6%, slightly due to a bit of additional hours. Again, we have a monthly retainer, litigation, and code compliance, code enforcement. You're going to see another component of the attorney's budget in code compliance, so we've split it into two categories. But basically, this is a status quo, recognizing there's been a slightly increased amount of work. And I will also point out that we have the 250,000 litigation and attorney contingency. So with that,
And where is that?
that's in the reserves that you saw earlier.
Okay,
And again, those would take authorization from the council.
right. Questions, Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. So on the budget highlights, it says town attorney and staff have been within the budgetary amounts identified within their monthly retainer for general municipal services. So are you saying that if they bill more than the hours expected by their retainer, we would be billed for that? I thought a retainer was kind of if they went 5 hours over 1 month or 2 hours.
Let me,
So, yeah, if
from
you
a
could just
billing
flesh that out a little,
standpoint, Councilmember Dorman, we always exceed the retainer.
Okay.
So it's not, I get a detailed billing, you all are forward with that. So from the standpoint, really the retainer for us functions as a minimum, and in reality, we spend on average about 10 to 15,000 a month depending on activity. And there's three functions that we, from the town attorney's budget, this is one segment. There's also what we call the code compliance, and that's a loss leader. And this last year, we've had significant code compliance costs. Part of it was putting processes in place and it would be less expensive going forward. Some were just the fact that we had 4 significant code compliance cases. The third component is what we call reimbursables, because when there is a project, and most of these involve planning and land use decisions on applicants, when there's a direct cost, then we receive a deposit and bill against that. So things like that. We do have some outstanding IOUs from a few of our appellants and folks that you have faced that we're working on recovery. 2 of those are now in collection, so we're also tightening that up. But I just want to share with you, the budget here is your core general fund, and we don't include the revenue from the, if you will, planning and land use, because that's an in and an out. We get reimbursed for that expense, and then you'll see another 25 to 35,000 in the code compliance program when Sandra talks about that.
Just looking at the very last, did you know on here with the, excuse me, the 180 email average per month, are either the council or any staff, I mean, I don't know how much savings there might be. I don't know if they're charging every 10 minutes or every email that Gary opens. Do we need to modify our behavior if we're copying Gary on things we shouldn't copy him, and it results in a charge for just reading and not even responding to an email?
We don't have that issue, in my opinion, with this firm.
Okay.
I continue to monitor that. We do, and I want to say I encourage the council having and making use of office hours and emails in a combination. But Gary's firm is not one that is, yes, you will see some costs, but I'm also going to tell you that, thank you, got it, we'll add it to my review. We're not being treated for 15 minutes for each of those. That will go into the review allocation, and part of that is they're working as an extension of staff in some of those areas as well. So, I mean, I think we're being well served. And I think for many of you that know, we also have the benefit of additional attorneys rather than just Gary as well, some of which have different specialties. So we are seeing increased costs this year. The California water audit lawsuit against the Veterans Home is costing us $10,000 to $15,000 just to be along for the ride. And we have a few other things, but I think we are in I think we have a good working relationship on both the staff end, and I haven't heard anything different from the council on the council end.
Okay, just checking on that in case it was just a minor behavior change. We needed to not copy Gary on things that really just need to go to you or department heads. So that's fine. If it's not a problem.
Well, I think that's we talk at the staff level about making sure that in some cases they check in with me on something before it goes on to Gary, because if I can resolve it, I am cheaper than the attorney. I am not licensed to practice in the state, but I will point that out. But there's just certain things, and we're again doing an overview and an update of a lot of our contract forms, because my belief is that internally, if we can work with Parsec, our town attorney and myself, and get a template format, then that will speed up things, make it less costly down the road where maybe we only have 2 or 3 issues. So we've been kind of doing that as an internal initiative as well this year.
I think just a heads up, it just popped into my head about elections, that we aren't going to Gary as our election authority, that we need to go through FPPC to get any kind of questions answered or rulings. I'm looking to Michelle to say, is that correct, that we shouldn't be reaching out to Gary? He is the council's representative, but not our individual election
Correct.
attorney.
Yes. Correct, that is correct.
Just so that it's clear, 'cause I know, Carrie, it's the first one you'll be doing, and just so we understand how that relationship
correct.
does and doesn't work.
Yes.
I'm assuming. Okay. Public safety?
Was here.
So the public safety budget is $989,723 with a 4% increase due to salaries and benefits. We are currently under a 3-year contract between town and Napa Sheriff's Department. There's really nothing, no changes to this budget other than they're going to keep protecting our lovely little town. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer.
I do have a question. Do we know the status of the law enforcement at the Veterans Home, and would that impact us potentially if it changes from the Sheriff's Department to the CHP?
Well, the first thing I would say is no, we don't know what that is. And secondly, it would be a fairly significant discussion of which the town would need to be a party of, because if I don't see it necessarily, if the Veterans Home wants to contract with the sheriff, that will either need to come under ours and we would increase it, or it would be separate. And if they bring CHP in, I don't necessarily see it resulting in a reduction in our contract costs, because we have the way our contract is structured, we have 4 primary deputies, and then we have all the administrative, specialty service support, additional backup, and up valley officers that are brought in under that structure. So it's a very flexible. For example, when we had the Veterans Home incident and we're responding, we don't get a bill for the SWAT team and all of those, because we're paying for that on an incremental basis all the way through. The same way detective costs and various things like that, even though we don't technically have a dedicated detective. So,
And I wouldn't anticipate it going down. I would just see it actually increasing if we added another layer of law enforcement at the state level. And I agree, you need to be, and I know you already are part of the conversation, but
Yeah, and
we
it's-
don't know. It's still undetermined.
we don't. And I would also say, we've also talked, and this is where, just so real clear, the state does not pay any property tax. And so there's no revenue generated from the veterans home to the town to offset service delivery costs. So in typical fashion in California, many large public institutions like the veterans home are responsible for the provision of their own services, which is what they're currently doing. Now, we have an overlapping under our contract where we provide emergency response, and that has been increasing. I will have to say the amount of time and energy that we're spending on the Veterans Home campus is increasing, but right now that's addressed. So the CHP is reviewing whether they're going to take over. The question there was, would that augment what the Veterans Home security? Also typical of fashion in California, though, is that they would pay an in lieu fee. So in most cases, the state, when they reimburse or pay a contribution to cities that host a large state facility or institution or building to cover their share of fire and police and related costs. So we would sit down and have that discussion. And we have that structure already in place because under our shared services agreement for the next one, the Veterans Home does pay directly into the three-way costs for the operation of Station 12. So we will continue to be dialoguing on what that might look like for public safety. I also will just share, it is also something in our discussion about increased housing that we would probably look at some point that part of that, if we are successful in our goal of bringing 200 to 300 apartments or something to the property, we are probably going to need to look at an increase in our public safety just to manage that. But I think there would also be some revenue coming in from that in lieu or contribution structure related to that. So that's just something in that broader picture we're working on it, but there's nothing there yet.
Okay, let's use that as a segue to fire and emergency medical services. Or we have a question. Pam, still going to encourage you to sit in the front row.
I had a question about the budget for public safety. I'm wondering if the council has considered, as other communities have considered, the idea of cost recovery of additional coverage due to second home owners. It is possible to assess whether someone uses an address as their primary residence, and it seems that in the past several years we've had an increase in burglary and response kind of things that go along with empty homes, and it just feels like if that's a trend in town, that it would be important for all of us to kind of spread the load of what it costs to police the area, and if there are some non-residents who leave their homes empty or even have short-term 30 days, people living there who don't have a stake in the community and who tend not to play by the rules, it's possible that there should be some additional fee that's assessed to people who have a second home in the area who are not really part of the community.
Okay, thank you. I'm not familiar with that. Pam, if you have any other cities that you have heard of that do that, to charge an additional fee to somebody that has a second home, I'm not sure that's going to go over very well for second homeowners. But feel free to share that with staff. We'll take a look. Any other comments, questions? Fire and emergency medical services.
Okay, so for Public Safety, Fire and Emergency Medical Services, Fund 3201, and Fire and Emergency Medical Services, Fund 28. A revised contract agreement has been recently reached with CAL FIRE for a cost of $768,333, in which we just received a fire tax credit of $120,000, which will offset that budget, reducing it to $648,333. The original estimate for the agreement, the increase to cost from $632 to $791 was due to labor negotiations and their new agreement. And that is about it, unless you have any questions.
Councilmember Durham?
Just so I understand, it says 19% of the calls are coming into Yountville of the calls that are placed with the fire department. Would we be paying $988,000 if it was just us anyways?
If it was just us, you'd be paying about $4.2 million.
All right, very good.
Because the reality of what we have is, right now, our utilization is lower than the other two entities, being the Veterans Home and the county. And I'll be very clear, the Veterans Home is the highest utilization because of some staff structures. But we would not have, if we operated a standalone, all-exclusive to Yountville Fire Station, we would be absorbing all of the costs. So you would basically multiply that times 3 plus the building costs that we would have. So this is why I'm very pleased to say that the relationship we had with the shared service structure is one of the more economical ones, because the county, the Veterans Home, and the town are sharing. And if all of us, with boundary drop and whatnot, the county needs something in our proximity. So this, the same way for both of these situations, it does not make economic sense for the town to try to have a standalone police department or standalone fire department. If that was the case, when you look at our operating budget, we would be well in the red, because and I'll just say it because I will say it every year, I want to bring your attention to the fact that our property tax, which is what we as all residents and businesses in Yountville pay, generates about $1.4 million, which is not enough to pay for the combined cost of our public safety. So that's what we all pay, plus our water and utility sewer bill, and our discretionary fees if you do a planning project or renovation, or you pay in our park and rec. So very little of our core municipal service delivery is paid for by the property tax. We are low on that and high on value for what our residents get for being a tourism community.
Well, and we continue to have more resources and more personnel at our disposal right across the street than we typically should have, frankly, because of the proximity in the middle of the valley also.
Well, I'm also going to say that was not by accident. When we designed the sheriff's substation, Mayor, Council, and this may be something that I need to remind everybody, but it was very conscious on our design intent to create the situation where the substation would also serve as a drop-off point for the Up Valley and regional deputies, so that they were coming in and out of town. So it increases our deputy presence. We also designed it so that it's also a stop-in spot for the Up Valley CHP officers. Again, purposeful so that they can come in, complete reports, transmit, but it brings more law enforcement presence into the community than it would be if we just simply had 1 to 3 potential officers on patrol at any point. A very conscious design element by your staff at the time when we put that in place.
Right.
Hence all my citations. Thank you.
That's right. Just stop at the stop sign. Park in a parking space. Fire Emergency Services Fund. I think we're finished with that section.
Yeah.
Yes. So so you feel like we just covered that fund through the public safety conversation? Okay. So then we're going back to finance?
Yes.
All right.
So total budget for finance is $597,621. It's 11% higher due to staff reallocation and a reclassification. So in this case, what I mean by staff reallocation is that the finance department is a really good example of a really healthy matrix system and the benefit of all of our talented staff that is shared across departments. So we allocate costs to the department based on staff time spent. So for example, Public Works and Finance shares a management analyst at 50% each. But then we also benefit across the organization from the management analyst in HR. who also supports finance. And so we reallocated that a little bit to have it be more true to the time spent. And then we are also proposing a reclassification. Since my arrival to the town as director, one of the things that I've been working on with the town manager's support and direction is to really improve capacity and the professional management of all of our finance and accounting measurements and reports. And so one of our positions is working at achieving that more journey level position, and would be reclassified to a financial analyst or management analyst with the working title of financial analyst. So that increases a change net of $5,800. And then $18,000 is budgeted for the transient occupancy tax audit. And so this is an item of interest that I'm bringing up only because it's done every 3 years, and it's just to really make sure that all of our operators are paying what they should, and that we're providing the right forms, and that we're accurately collecting data in the best way possible. Any questions about the finance department budget?
No. Move ahead, OPEB.
All right. So OPEB is something I covered at the beginning of our presentation today. Just to re-highlight that the budget is $589,740, and this is the way that we're going to spend it. So $139 is meant to cover the existing retiree expenses for their health insurance and what we're committed to providing for them as their benefit. And then $450,740 is going to be invested into our OPEB trust, so that we can continue to have funds available to cover benefits in the future. We know that the fund is really healthy, and at this point I want to say it's about $2 million guesstimate, so it's doing well. The proposed budget has only changed slightly to account for the 14.5% formula that I mentioned earlier to cover the ARC. When the actuarial study is completed, we may have to change that participation formula, but we would come to you to report that and have you determine whether you'd like to make that decision. Any questions about OPEB?
No? Okay. PERS.
So PERS, this is a new fund. It's for the unfunded actuarially accrued liability. Fund 03, we've budgeted $616,509. Of this, $302,183 is required by PERS. It's the payment that we make when the market doesn't perform. It's a 17% increase compared to last year. $314 will be invested into our pension rate stabilization fund, which was recently adopted. So those are really the basic highlights for this budget line item. Are there any questions?
You're basing this on what percentage with PERS?
So
7%?
Sorry, what's your question? Which is?
The PERS, why am I blanking on the percentage?
The discount rate.
Yeah, it's 7% right now.
Lower the
But it's the expectation is it's going to go even lower.
There's two things that are coming to us this year. One is they're going to change the amortization from 30 years of paying for the unfunded actuarially accrued liability to 20. I think that's coming in fiscal year 2020, if I'm not mistaken, so it's coming. And then, yes, the rate of return for the fund performance has been lowered, and I think it was at 7.5. I think they lowered it to 7.
I believe that, but they're anticipating it going even lower.
Yes.
So I'm just, my question is, are you factoring this in with that expectation, or until it's reality, you don't
We do not
deal with it?
We don't factor it until we receive it because we'd just be playing a huge guessing game. We just have to wait and see what that does, unfortunately.
It's going to go down.
Yes.
But Mayor, to your point, that's what I would also say is the difference that you see there is we are setting aside more than what PERS
Right.
is actually, and that's in preparation to have funds in there should we get to a point that it causes us to have to drop down into using that fund on an annual basis.
Yeah, that's prudent because the forecast is not positive. Councilmember Moeller?
I just want to make a comment because this always makes me mad. They should be changing the amortization rate to 40 years, not the other direction. That just, anyway. End
Thanks
comment.
for that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cities in dire situations. Thankfully, we aren't one of them right now, but we have to keep ahead of that curve. Any other questions, comments on PERS? Okay. I think that does general government. Very good.
transitioning to the departments. And first, we've got Sandra Liston for Planning and Building.
Welcome.
Good morning. So the first I'll present to you is the General Fund Department for Planning and Building Department. And as you can see on this slide, our budget is down about 27%, and that's mainly due to a decrease in contract services for the general plan since we'll be entering the final stage, and I'll get into that a little bit later. We're also expecting revenues to be slightly up, and that's due to the annual monitoring and registration fees we're receiving for use permit monitoring, employee parking management programs, and also for the rental registration, which is a new program this year. Now I'll share with you some of the budget highlights, and these are newer changed items that will occur over the next fiscal year. The first is that we are transitioning the 2-year planning fellow position to an assistant planner position, and that is set to occur at end of this year when that planning fellow position comes to an end, and that coincides with hopefully the approval of the general plan. And at that time, this position would conduct the monitoring and management of the programs that you see here. Some of those are one-time check-ins, such as the wayfinding sign program or the rental registration. Others are more ongoing throughout the year and require continuous work, as the conditional use permit monitoring and the employee parking management program. The position would also do more enhanced code compliance services, and that can be anything from monitoring vacation rentals to dealing with noise violations or realtor signs. Those items pop up over the course of a year and need to be dealt with, and we're trying to spend more time on handling that at staff level. We do work for 4 hours each week with City of Napa, but that's not enough in order to dedicate the resources we want to these efforts. The next budget highlight is that we are entering the final stage of the Envision Yountville General Plan update, and we are adding $60,000 to the budget for this next fiscal year, and that's in addition to the funds that are already encumbered from the past 2 fiscal years for this effort. That leads to the next item, which is a decrease in contract services, and for the general plan alone, we see a decrease from $175,000 this year to $60,000 next year, but it also includes such items as on-call planning services. It includes town attorney budget for planning specific items, and that is for legal assistant with code enforcement, appeals, and the review of our draft ordinances that we take to him. We also see an increase in the building inspections budget, and that is a trend of more building permits that are issued, but it's also a result of the fact that we have 30 open permits with Vintage Villaggio alone. Those permits issued this year, yet the inspections will be conducted, many of them will be conducted next year. And the last item is the launch of the online permitting and application system for building permits, and they've developed our program for us. We are now testing it in-house, and we are excited to launch that so that the public has an easier resource to do online submittals. That wraps it up for the Planning and Building General Fund, and I'm happy to answer any questions before moving on.
Councilmember Durham, go ahead.
Just a real quick clarification on the FTE.
Yes.
How the management analyst can put in more time than you. You're 1, and the management analyst is
I have Nathan
1.025.
for a full 1, and I receive a little of Julie, too.
Very good. Thank you.
I know, that one boggled my mind as well.
Councilmember Dorman.
Thank you. So on the limited term planning fellow that will transition to a permanent assistant planner, will we then, is there a thought to then replace the planning fellow so that we will end up with an additional employee, not extra, additional?
No.
Yes, and that's, I'm going to agree with
No.
yes,
No,
meaning
not.
yes, agreeing to what Sandra said. So let me get
Very
back.
easy answer is no additional
Right.
staff.
And the reason we looked at this is when we started the planning fellow, we had an opportunity to provide some support structure, recognizing we were taking our hybrid approach. We've come to realize with that position that, and I want to be really clear for the public, we have 2 planning positions. And we have increased expectations amongst the council and the community for code compliance and structure. And we've come to realization that in terms of what we need to do with all of the current projects, that's not enough staff resource. And at one point, we'd actually reduced planning resources several years ago. Now we're coming back. So what you see here is an opportunity. It's incremental costs, and that's where we looked at it. But Sandra and I spent a lot of time on workload and projecting where we're going. So what this is going to result in is 3 dedicated planning and building positions, continued some admin support, but this will also allow them, when we look at, like we're doing cannabis discussion and we're doing a lot more activity, ZDRB staff support and structure to meet the needs, to put stuff out online, the transparency. We can't meet the expectations with 2. And I think we're just going to be very clear about that. But what we've also seen is a path, because the council's been very supportive of bringing in some revenue that's going to allow us to continue that. So we felt that when we did the analysis, and that's why we're pointing out that if the council was to say no, the planning fellows termination date would be when the general plan ends, which is the December end of this year, not our budget, because that's how that cycle. So we felt this was a great opportunity to look at it, and it had afforded a very incremental cost for us to move forward.
Well, I think it makes sense, especially based on the general plan conversations we're having, whether it's accessory dwelling units, we're talking about how to repurpose, whether it's home, business permits, infill in general. We have plenty of things that we haven't been dealing with that we will be dealing with. So,
and again, completion of the general plan actually is, we take a deep sigh, but it actually creates another level of work, which we want to be able to have Sandra and the staff be able to work on, which is the implementation of some of the more specific policies and recommendations that come out of the general plan. And when we looked at that and just saw where we're at, and that's why it's also more incremental, we'll be bringing to you at the next council meeting just a little bit of a modernization on a few job descriptions, including the assistant planner position, because we're putting a little more emphasis on code compliance. Or as I like to say with Sandra, we have a tongue-in-cheek relationship when we talk about this. This is making sure that the planners understand the impacts of what they plan, because code compliance is actually going out into the real world and going, all right, we've approved all of this, but how's it really working? And we use, as you all know, a lot of conditional use permits. Conditional use permits have, by word, conditions, and we need to be doing compliance. I don't need to share with some of you that, we hear in the county about, well, we only review 10 or 20 wineries a year for code compliance, and you have over 500. That's not an acceptable level of service. We touch every one of our conditional use applications at least once a year.
okay.
All right.
Pam, was there a question back there? No?
Sorry, a couple
Yeah.
more.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
The 60,000 that you're saying, an additional 60,000, is that still within the 850
Yes.
of the original general plan
Yes.
budget? Okay, and the 40,000, an increase for the building inspections, is that offset by fees, permit fees?
Well,
So will that come
not
out a wash?
exactly.
No.
Oftentimes, we'll bring in the fees the prior fiscal year when the permits issue, and then we have the obligation to do the inspections the following year. So that's recognizing a little bit of that situation.
So we probably already have that 40,000 now? Is that,
No, we
sorry.
did see an increase in the cost for building inspections this year because there's simply increased activity.
I mean, what I would say, Councilmember Dorman, is typically the answer would be yes, but we run into the timing period, because for illustration purposes, somebody comes in and pulls a building permit, pays all their fees on June 1st. Most of the inspections will occur in the next fiscal year. So we try to allocate a reasonable base. So in this particular year, we're going to exceed on revenue just because more revenue on the permits were brought in, and then we'll try to budget for the expenses that are anticipated when those calls for inspections occur in the follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Is that it?
I have one comment.
Councilmember Mueller.
So I would again just like to encourage that when we come up for looking at fees, now there might be a little extra staff time that we really make a push for cost recovery as best we can. I know we talked about this once it started increasing 4 or 5 years ago, so just, I think that's important to do, and I know it takes time to do that, so.
Not mentioned here, but we are working to update our building permit fees to make sure that they adequately cover the costs.
It's same way with all the other programs too. Let's try to really, nothing's free, so.
Correct.
And that's a good point, Councilmember Moeller. We use a deposit fee structure on a lot of planning, and we're going to continue to emphasize that. And then the costs are actual costs. And sometimes we have to remind the applicant that the $2,000 deposit, and they sign a little thing saying that they understand. And then they're like, well, why are you billing me more? Well, you ended up requiring more staff time, more external consultant time, and various things. On some of the land use and planning projects, we also are being more judicious at whether it makes sense to use our internal staff or to use a project consultant where the external costs can be passed on directly to the applicant. So that's something we're spending a little more time, Sandra and I are, on recognizing how to get the best bang for our buck, because sometimes us doing a 30-hour project and charging our internal costs is not the best bang, because it competes with other internal stuff that we can't necessarily recover well. So that's just a little change in our approach that we're looking at.
Okay.
All right.
Question before we go ahead.
Trying to move on.
I just wanted to say that along with the idea of cost recovery, I don't know if the council has looked at low-income subsidy or deferment of fees for people who can't afford the constant additional fee structure. It seems like that would assist the town in maintaining its standards of beauty and whatever cleanliness that people who need to do projects in their house also, who are not able to foot the bill for the fees might be encouraged to do that work if they got a little bit of leeway from the town, just as you have passed the subsidies for low income for water bills and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Housing Grant Fund.
All right, so
Speaking of giving money away, Housing Grant Fund.
So the two programs you see here, the two funds, are in response to policies and programs that are in the housing element. The first one, Fund 24, represents the home and the Cal Home grants that were made available to low-income households for rehabilitation. And prior to the expiration of those grants, we awarded 35 home improvement projects totaling $615,000. Those loans are long-term deferred loans that are to be paid back in certain circumstances upon a transfer in ownership. So we're not really expecting any payments, although they will occur from time to time, and those will be used to fund future projects. The next fund, 01-1500, receives revenue from affordable housing in lieu fees that apply to commercial projects, and we enter into a contract in the amount of $35,000 with City of Napa Housing Authority. They manage our housing programs and notably the affordable housing items, and then we contribute $13,400 to local housing advocates, including CanV, Napa Valley Community Housing, and Fair Housing, and those are all in support of general plan housing element policies. Any questions?
Questions, comments? It sounds like I'm just reading your accomplishments of this last year. The home rehabilitation program speaks to what Pam just brought up, where money was being provided to residents to rehab their homes. Mm-hmm. So that program already existed. Mm-hmm. And that expired last year.
It doesn't expire. What we have is the initial funding grant. We've expended it. The nature of this program is set up so that as some of these there's two elements. Some are a loan, and they're tied basically to when a person sells or passes away and the heirs sell. I mean, I don't want to, but that's, so over time, we will start seeing some money come back in to the program that then we can bring back out under that. And then,
Well, I see the Community Development Block Grant application is intended to do the same thing.
yes.
It would extend these programs, yes.
So
Okay.
we will continue to look at that. And these are, again, all income eligible because there are criteria for determination and evaluation, and the town doesn't get into that. We use the federal and state and county criteria working on that because trying to determine whether somebody's low income is
Right.
really not our staff prerogative. We work on the conditions, we share that with people, and then they make a determination whether to apply for the program or not.
Any questions about the Housing Grant Fund or Housing Opportunity Program sections? No? Okay. Impact fees?
Here you see some of our impact fees, and they are fees assessed at building permit issuance for new construction or conversion of use. And we don't budget for impact fees because it's too difficult to anticipate, but when the funds are received, they benefit the capital projects fund. Any questions?
Pretty straightforward there.
Pretty straightforward. Next one's even simpler. These are the the Talent Lane and the Mesa Court benefit districts, and these two are assessed at time of development on Talent Lane or Mesa Court. Fund 95 for Talent Lane did receive a little over $3,000 for a single-family residence that is under construction. It's very rare, however, that we receive the impact fees for these two areas since they're subject to building permit issuance. And that wraps things up for planning and building.
Any questions left for planning and building? No. Thank you, Senator, very much. Public Works. Here comes Mr. Public Works.
Setting up on the world of impact fees, one thing I will just share is we continue to caution you all that they're not going to be a significant revenue source because we're reaching build out. The other thing I wrestle with is the nature of the impact fees were established a number of years ago. So at some point we may need to reconcile or do an update. I've been hesitant to do because reaching build out, California law requires that you do an extensive study, so it's not an inexpensive proposition to do an impact fee update, but it may very well be something in the next year or two that we want to look at because we continue to see a level of redevelopment, and we may just want to look at that.
Well, does the state mandated ADUs and infill, can those even be calculated as having additional impact fees, or do the properties already cover it?
Actually, Mayor, Council, it depends is the answer. And the short answer is certain ones, they are excluded from impact fees, others they can be. So that's why you'll continue to see some of those. But for us, the bigger ticket ones for the most part, which include the connection and buy-in to water, wastewater, utilities, and some of the streets type of impacts, they're not allowed because the argument is infill development that's already. So again, I don't see it as a big item, but again, we're seeing a little bit more activity, so it's just something staff's going to monitor. But I will just point out that our impact fees are based on a study that's over 20 years old on cost. So that's why I'm saying, but we're looking at something in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $85,000 to do an update. So it's hard for me to recommend an expenditure of that level when we're not generating at this point that level of return from
Right.
impact fees.
Okay. Public Works, Joe, welcome.
Good morning. So Public Works, this is the operations fund side of our business as opposed to the enterprise fund side, which we will be coming at you on the next workshop. So admin, engineering, streets maintenance, park maintenance, and government buildings today. As you can see, up a little bit with the exception of parks maintenance. This is mostly driven by personnel costs that the finance director talked about earlier, and then some contract services that have gone up and some basic utilities costs that are increasing. Overall, we have a 4% increase in the operations budget for Public Works. Admin and engineering, it's higher by $30,000 and a little more than $30,000 as an increase in personnel costs. And as the finance director talked about earlier, it's just an effort to kind of consolidate stuff and make it much easier to track and allocate. The operations budget, however, is lower by $11,730, mainly because we had budgeted some money in supplies and services, which we had not been utilizing fully, so we reduced that to a more tolerable level, and a slight reduction in contract services. I think the biggest thing to note for us in Public Works this year is the funding that's going to be available from Measure T, SB1, and the gas tax. That will take the place of projects funded entirely by the general fund in the past. Expected revenue is somewhere in the order of $530,000 from these funds. That's a very conservative estimate, and we're basing our CIP street paving program and some curb and gutter programs on that $530,000 number. So we will be back the next workshop to discuss that a little bit more. But the important part is that's completely general fund support free. So it's a nice way to get the roads built without impacting the general fund. Streets maintenance. Budget highlights for this division. Overall, the budget is up by $39,000. This is really driven in almost entirely by two items. The first is contract sweeping services going up by about $14,000. It's required as a part of our stormwater permit to keep the streets clean. We will not be incurring the same costs as other municipalities around us, trying to install full capture devices and try to manage a utility, unfunded utility. We are rated as green, which we are the envy of the valley, and we do that through our trash cans and recycling cans that we have everywhere around this town, and we are fortunate that citizens use them, and a street sweeping program that manages to get that debris up off the streets. Also of note is the gas and electric utility bill is going up. The finance department and their staff has put together a remarkable spreadsheet that allows us to forecast the utilities a little more accurately. We had been really not allocating enough money, and as a result, the operations budget was coming out of other parts of the operations budget to fund utilities. So with the advent of that great spreadsheet, we're able to forecast that a little better and get a much tighter number. Parks maintenance, that budget is actually going to have a reduction of $11,400. Most of that is the reallocation of personnel costs. However, we also approved a mid-year budget adjustment this year for the removal of the heritage oak, and that also caused that budget to go up this year, but will be almost responsible for it going down and reduced to $219,000 and change, and reflects our status quo budget. Government buildings, so this is our facilities budget. Again, you increase in utilities with the help of the finance department in their spreadsheet. Contract services, the janitorial services for the sheriff's annex and the post office is going up, and we're trying to capture that and get a little better at allocating those costs where they go, and an increase in facilities maintenance. This will be a one-time, one-year cost to replace the fluorescent light fixtures in the post office with LED fixtures, a little more energy efficient, but we've been spending a lot of time just kind of patching those things together, so this will get the last of those replaced and get us into a more energy efficient fixture. And then finally, we have a $200,000 loan from the Energy Resources Conservation, principal and interest. This was part of a ESCO project that the council approved back in 2011, and we will continue to pay these for the next several years. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on Public Works operations.
Questions from the council? Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. So on the parks maintenance, in the department overview, it says funds are budgeted for an additional seasonal worker May through September, a total of 350 hours. Is that, again, is that new this year, or is that something we do every year and you're just calling out?
Yeah.
That's the parameter of
That's
that
the
employee?
trash. That's
Perfect.
Gabe, who picks up the trash a few days
Okay.
a week, and on the
That's
weekends
Gabe.
cleans the restrooms.
Right, thank you.
It is not new. We always have a seasonal capacity as well.
I will say one thing, just to kind of put a little bit of an exclamation point on Councilmember Dorman's question. In the past, we have budgeted for up to 3 additional seasonal workers. With the onboarding of the full-time staff member that you all approved last year, Larry thought that he could not, would not be needing those additional seasonal workers. We're still kind of in the trial period, but we've come through most of the weed season, and we haven't had to onboard any additional help, so that worked out very well. It actually probably is a reduction in net overall costs for the town, without a reduction in services.
Councilmember Durham?
The lease with the post office, so are we paying the utility bills, or are they paying the utility bills as part of that lease?
So we
The
receive.
voice from the back of the room?
Thank you.
We receive a payment from them for rent, but they pay the utilities.
Thank you.
Joe, don't mean to put you on the spot about Prop 68. I'm not sure if it fits here. The Drought, Water, Parks, Climate Bond that's coming up this year, my understanding is there's at least $200,000 per city, town that would be allocated through that for parks, water, climate, environment. Do you know if that's something that would be eligible in some of the maintenance categories you just listed, or not? I don't know, Steve, if you...
I'll take that one
Okay.
a little bit
Okay.
further. We're monitoring that, and I think if it comes through as it's envisioned, what I see us doing is it would be designed for us to go into our parks and continue our things like replacing things with drought-tolerant landscaping, sprinkler systems to drip irrigation. So it would be intended to use it in a way like that that's going to convert and save money. But we're waiting to see some of the final details and how the program would be rolled out. But
It'll be decided June 5th, so we'll know before this budget kicks in, but maybe after we've
right, we haven't
analyzed
the
it.
state hasn't, and they haven't put out all of the procedures and processes, whether, for example, if it's going to be a program grant requirement that we have to apply for, or if they're going to distribute it on a per capita basis and some guidance. We think it will be helpful because we've been continuing to do some drought tolerant, and it would let us do some other areas that might allow us to, but we need to see some of the rules, but if it is, it could either augment and allow us to do some things we're not doing, or it could potentially result in some cost savings.
Well,
We
as
don't
recently
know.
as a couple weeks ago at the league board meeting, they were still talking about a minimum 200,000 allocation per jurisdiction.
Right, and I'm just saying, that hasn't been
Yeah.
distributed by the state in terms of how they're going to, we're monitoring it, and that's the best I can say, and when we, I'm pretty good at making sure we get our share of money when there's an opportunity.
We will put
because
it to good use.
Yeah, it's like as SB 1 rolls out and Regional Measure 3, which is probably less of a direct issue for us, but SB 1 and Measure T transportation dollars, those are very, shovel-ready dependent. So we need to be kind of ready if we do have some projects that fall into these
We
categories.
definitely have stuff that we
Our
would
CIP
use that
already.
money.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, that's
Okay.
where we have to look at the language, because sometimes to be successful, you really you have to understand the focus of which they want the grant.
Sure.
If they want to give us $200,000, we're going to
take it.
figure out how to use it.
We'll take it.
Yep.
Right. Any other questions, Councilmember Mueller?
Yeah, just another kind of FYI, for the money that we get from Upper Valley Waste Management, we're on a new system as based on a contract extension where we'll automatically get $5,000 a year. So I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think it's in about the $25,000 range that we have kind of banked away. You might want to consider using some of that banked away money for town garbage services, so that, because I think the $5,000 that's going to be coming in every year could probably be used for cleanup day, because now that we're pretty cleaned up, it's not going in. So just an FYI, if something comes up that's garbage related, you do have a credit that we wanted to maintain long term for cleanup day, but now we have a new source that can help supplement that.
So we can,
Even replacing our garbage cans that we have around town and recycling bins, I mean, that's kind of a constant churn, and they're not inexpensive, so there's several ways that we can utilize those funds if they do come our way.
And we're also talking about redoing all of those into a different material that's supposed to last a lot longer, but that will all be kind of rolled into the every user fee bill. So just remember that extra funds.
Thank you.
They always break down one wheel at a time, too, so.
Well, we're going to have lots of stickers, and we have to have trash police now. There's not a lot of new state mandates, but more on that later.
Any other Public Works? Joe, thank you.
Thank you very much.
She's already made her way. Parks and Recreation, welcome.
Efficient. Thank you. Get myself situated. Good morning, Council and Mayor. So we are looking at the Parks and Recreation Department General Fund budget. Overall, we have a 7% increase across all of our different divisions, which is consistent with what Maria described earlier, mainly due to increased cost for staffing. So I'll go through quickly each of our areas. The 5405 is the first, administration. So this is pretty much a status quo budget for the department. There is a decrease in part-time staffing due to moving costs of extra help for the Arts Commission, which includes help for events as well as part of our marketing intern into a new budget department, which is 5415, and I'll go over that last. But we have created the new department budget for Arts Commission to just be a little more transparent and also to ease of tracking for their expenses. We've also added bank fees to the 5405. So these are charges from the bank for use of credit card processing that used to all be charged to the finance department budget. That's now being allocated out amongst the departments that use those services, so Parks and Recreation as well as Planning and Building. And so that's a new allocation for us. Any questions on administration?
No.
Alrighty, moving right along. So day camp, again, there's no major changes to this budget. Whoops, I didn't do that. So I was like, there's a ghost. However, each year the minimum wage increases this budget, just as we described earlier. So again, day camps, we offer summer break, winter, Thanksgiving, and spring break camps. But overall, that's a status quo budget. Any questions on day camp?
Just to keep moving.
Alrighty. Pool and aquatics. So we do. We are going into the budget year status quo, although we do know that we are having some changes due to staffing levels. So the budget does show an increase due to the rise in minimum wage. The decreases in revenue were projected based on the decline in visitors from last summer. They don't take into consideration the changes to the summer 2018 pool schedule as we were in the budget process. Some of that is still in flux, so we hope to hopefully add back programming as I described to you when we had our when I gave you that update a few weeks ago. We to date still do not have a pool manager, and that's pretty key in adding any programming back. So at this point, this is a status quo budget. I do have estimates for revenue and expense or revenue shortfall and expense savings based on the schedule, but we decided to see how the staffing levels pan out for that. As we spoke about when I gave the update, I don't have enough time to prepare the comprehensive analysis for you that I want to, as far as projecting out the capital improvement projects that are going to be needed at that facility, as well as the escalating staffing costs. So this budget does look status quo, but I will be back to you with a comprehensive review of the pool and a more detailed discussion of that.
If I could, the reason we've left it as status quo is we're going to see less revenue offset by less expense. So we will come back and do a reconciliation, but we felt it was better to program as if we were going to, so we also have a baseline. It will increase what we believe will be the amount of the general fund subsidy at the end of it. But from an overall expenditure standpoint, the planned expenditure will not happen, and the planned revenue will not happen. But right. If you were the maximum, if we were able to suddenly find staff, we still need the budget authority that was in the proposed budget, if that makes any sense.
Yep. Councilmember Mueller?
I would just like to add emphasis that I'd really like to see that. I think we do need to have that discussion, warts and all, when it comes time and you're prepared. So thank you for doing that.
You're talking about the CIP. What are you
No,
talking about?
just really, I think we have to take a comprehensive look
Right.
at this, at the pool and our, contributions to it, and just the situation that we're in, to make sure that we fully recognize all the costs and expenditures.
Councilmember Durham?
Especially if we're going to be talking about the CIP for the pool. So I definitely want to. Thank you. I just want to reiterate.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. So I think you've said this 3 times, 3 ways, but I just want to be clear because I had the question from a resident. The budget that you're presenting for the pool does not take into account that we have not found XYZ lifeguards and a pool manager. So
That's correct. So,
Okay.
and the pool is
I just wanna
difficult
make that
because
clear.
it spans fiscal years as well. So we open in June. So you'll see a savings in the current budget year as well as the next fiscal year budget based on what we think is going to be the modified schedule.
Perfect, perfect.
We
Thank
may
you.
have a change in that, but at this point, it doesn't appear that that's going to materialize. So, but it is status quo as though we had full programming.
And sometimes people forget that budgets are not cash out and in. Right. These are projections, so that makes sense to do it that way.
It is projections, yeah, and we hope that things will change. But I've already started working on the format for what I'm saying is kind of a 5-year projection of that, and that'll come back to you as an administrative item on a future agenda to have a discussion and really kind of hone in on how we see the future of that.
And I think what we want to talk about there is it's bigger than just an individual CIP project. We're going to be looking longer term and we're going to be analyzing the lease arrangement with the Veterans Home, expectations, challenges, utilization, and where the visitor. What we're also seeing, frankly, is an operating challenge on a seasonal 10 to 12-week operation for the duration. So we're going to be, I don't want to just say it's limited to the CIP, but for some people, you may remember the town stepped in to renovate back in the 2003-ish era to rehabilitate at 100% the town's cost for what was then a pool in very bad shape at the Veterans Home. So the town forwarded all of that expense, completed that project in around 2006 based on what I was able to research. And then we are also, the town is responsible for all of the operating costs, all of the maintenance costs. We pay a $1 lease. So if we start looking, if you kind of fast forward, we're at the 10 to 12 year point on that renovation, and not all of the pool equipment and things were replaced. So we want to look more comprehensively to really understand, is that the appropriate output of expenditure for the return? Does it meet the community's expectation, the council's expectation? Don't know the answer, but it's a more significant number, and we're going to be able to present along with the operating challenges and show some of the utilization. And we may need to go back and have a different conversation with the Veterans Home also going forward.
Well, and they're reviewing every lease and every part of the property as well, so the timing makes sense for us to be evaluating as well.
Ours is one they probably like.
Unless they have other purposes for the space, but we don't know that. Okay. Community center and operations.
So community center operations comprises all of the funds that we need to run the community center and keep it well maintained. It also has staffing for building attendants, which staff our private events for rentals, and the revenue generated in that category is for generally private events that rent the facility. We are including a $5,000 for further increase items for the plaza. So we have had some great sponsorships, new furniture that's being really well used. We're going to be looking at some shade umbrellas and different elements that we're going to add this summer. So we're asking for $5,000 for that. Otherwise, there's no other significant changes to this budget.
Councilmember Durham?
I've got a question about what your cost recovery percentage is at 19.1%. Is there a standard that you want it to be at?
So we've struggled a little bit, and I think I described this when I did the annual report, with figuring out a balance between programming and rentals. And so I was really excited to bring to you that report that showed how high our utilization is for residents taking classes, and with that becomes less availability of the center. So generally Saturdays are our biggest day. There's only 52 of them in a year. You take out holiday weekends, we're down to about 46. And so I would really like to continue seeing that number rise. We're putting a lot more effort into programming some midweek type things. I've started cursory conversations with the Chamber of Commerce and some of the lodging properties about bringing us all together so that we can better market to larger conferences, because the town is so small, and none of our properties can really hold a large scale conference, but together we may be able to better utilize that. Our weekends are pretty full at this point, and so I don't see a whole lot of cost recovery, by targeting weddings and such, because generally they want the weekend. Where I do see opportunity is in our midweek, and so finding partners, because again, the center isn't that large either. So we did have a large scale conference come in. I described that to you in an update this year, and it was a learning curve, and I think what I learned from that is somehow trying to bridge the connections with our lodging properties in the Lincoln Theater and the Napa Valley Museum to say, look what we can offer your 300 to 400 person conference as far as room nights and facility use. So I do see an opportunity there. I don't think, when I started here, the center had just opened, and I had to work for a few years to bring back revised numbers as far as what the potential really was for rentals there. And I think that I do feel a lot of support from the council over the last few years as far as really pushing how to better serve our residents, and we're really achieving that. But with that comes, it costs quite a bit of money to maintain that facility, and I think if we got to 25 to 30% cost recovery from rentals, that would be a pretty great goal. I'm not sure if you're going to see so much higher than that unless we started charging ourselves rent.
That's exactly
and then we're going to be charging our customers more money as well.
The point I wanted to bring up is we have taken a philosophy of not having an internal facility charge to our programs and activities, with a goal of keeping our programs more affordable. So I'm going to just amplify what Samantha is talking about. So we run, we put her in a schizophrenic situation about wanting all the programming, because if we were just to say we didn't rent it out, we'd have still roughly the same cost. You'd have a little less building attendant and some of that cost, but for us just to have the space available to put our programming in, and what you're really seeing is the quantum increase in programming and utilization of the building for what I think was really its primary intended purpose. But now what you're seeing is that's competing with our rentals. So I think what we need to be looking at is what Sam's talking about. We maximize the weekends. We also can look at midweek. But probably, I think, Sam, if you could just share with them, we also donate to our nonprofit-based community groups, and some of those, that's in the range of $75,000 to $85,000 a year in value. So there's, a lot of other factors that go into, if you will, what the cost recovery. So this is an area where we consciously, much like the pool, we don't come nearly as close because of those decisions. I mean, if I said we wouldn't give away, she would have another, like I say, 75 to 85,000 in revenue, but we wouldn't be supporting some of the community-based activities that are important to you all.
Well, thankfully, the lodging and hospitality in general is targeting the same midweek corporate business that you're talking about.
Yeah.
They've also brought on some of their own facility resources, but hopefully there's going to be room for that 300 to 400 guest event.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in the Valley, there's limited resources for people looking for more of a convention center type atmosphere, so they don't tend to come here because of that. They go to larger cities, but if we could somehow better market together, I think that would be very advantageous to all of us. So
correct, and when we look at it, when, some conventions, they're price conscious for their rooms, and I don't need to probably point out that a price conscious conference is probably not coming to Yountville based on the room rate charges that we have. So, I mean, that takes them out of a different, the types of uses would tend to be more unique and a higher end.
Okay. After-school program.
After-school program. So we're continuing to budget to run the after-school program at the Yountville Elementary School. That program is every day after school until 5:30. We currently serve about 50% of the population of the school, and we hope to continue increasing that. So under this budget, you see, again, just a increase in staffing costs as far as minimum wage increasing. We also are estimating a little bit of decrease in revenue, and this is based on enrollment numbers for 17-18. We really just attribute that to the transition and staff. So we tend to sometimes lose people and new people come on with a difference in supervisor. We're also we're working with the school very closely to roll out really a fully rebranded program next year that integrates a Wednesday afternoon enrichment class. That'll be something we share, mostly funded through the PTA, but that we help facilitate. So all of our after-school kids will get to participate, as well as other children in the school will pay a fee, but it'll be included in our after-school rate, and our staff will help oversee and support that. So things that kids don't get during the school day much anymore, like art and physical fitness, like classes like yoga, meditation, or different sports, as well as coding and robotics. So I'm looking at bringing in instructors in partnership with them. The school continues to be very healthy as far as enrollment is concerned. The conversation right now and the issue is, obviously, if you've read, the school district is having budget cuts, and we are currently at capacity for the amount of teachers that we have. And so there's a conversation going on as far as it's difficult to turn students away when we're being told we need to continue increasing enrollment. And so how do we navigate that? But it's a good problem to have. The school is healthy. We're continuing to get students. And as far as the after-school program is concerned, I think it's just a terrific benefit for the town and the students that do choose to transfer up here. Any questions on the after-school program budget?
Seeing none. Leisure.
Leisure programs. So this area is comprised of our Golden Ticket program, our fee-based contract classes, and our excursions. This is a status quo budget, again, showing slight increases in the salary and benefits line, and that's mainly for part-time staff that help oversee the many programs that are going on all at the same time every day at the community center. The majority of our class instructors are on contract, and so they are not paid employees. They are contract employees, so they are paid either a flat rate for each class or a percentage. Any questions on leisure programs?
Nope.
Okay. Sports programs, again, status quo. This is our pickleball open gym, basketball open gym, and our mini sports programs. There's no major changes there.
Okay.
Keep moving. Community events. So we touched on this earlier. This is where we comprise most, they're all of our free and low cost things. So the town tree lighting, the 4th of July fireworks, Halloween carnival, movies in the park, music in the park, egg hunt, residence bash, our coffee and popcorn freebies are all comprised. There are slight increases to this budget after the new format of the town and tree lighting last year, where we partner with the Chamber of Commerce. That event obviously had more people in attendance. It was very successful. We plan on keeping that model, and the cost went up as because the people went up. We had about almost 700 people to that event, which was a huge increase over years past. Any questions on community events?
With the additional activities in especially Veterans Memorial Park with the amphitheater, are we seeing any unforeseen or unbudgeted impacts maintenance-wise or repair-wise?
I don't think so. I mean, I work really well with Joe and his crew. Oh, he's not. He left. But everything seems to be working really well. We've had a little blips with electricity, but that was all done under the maintenance agreement on the contract. And I mean, I couldn't believe how everything bloomed right before Art Sip and Stroll. I don't know if you've been out there, but everything's working really well. Yeah.
Good. Councilmember Moeller?
Just, again, want to comment on fireworks at 4th of July. A lot of people around the valley are discontinuing them. I expect that we're going to have even a larger crowd than usual, so I'm still very supportive of fireworks.
I think only Silverado Resort has announced they're canceling.
So St. Helena announced that they're no longer selling personal fireworks, but then, Silverado's the only cancellation I saw. But I have had that question come up as people are reading it. We have already started our permitting process with CAL FIRE, and I don't anticipate changes to the program that we put on here in Yountville.
For some reason, there did start to be a talk of St. Helena and Yountville having canceled them, which we proved, no, that's not true.
No.
I think there was confusion, as you just pointed out, about the personal sale up in St. Helena.
Yeah.
So plan on it, 4th of July fireworks in Yountville.
Yes.
We'll get all those folks from Silverado.
Yeah.
Okay. Next.
So the next department is the 5415. This is the Yountville Arts Program. So this is a new department where we've moved expenses and revenue that were previously shown under the community promotions budget. So this shows a $25,000 subsidy that the town gives to the Yountville Arts Commission to operate programming each year. We are also working on, as you know, the Yountville Community Foundation has now started, so they'll have some accounting under the foundation as well. But this is the general fund subsidy and support for their programs. It includes everything, but we did not move full-time staffing support to this area. That's still under my administration budget, the 5405. But it does, as I described, the 5405 is decreased in part-time staffing because we moved part of that into this account. So the marketing intern and then event support.
And the donation commissions of 12,000 represents what projected?
So what our projected expenses are 42,000, and the town subsidizes, I believe, hold on, let me pull up the detail. The town subsidizes them with $25,000, and so that would be the shortfall. So covering the additional 12. And then the rest of their revenue would end up in their foundation account.
Councilor Durham?
But that's 30. Yeah.
So we've said in the past that we give the arts 20,000, when in fact, though, this is showing 42,000, when all is said and done with the town's contribution, correct?
So they're bringing in 12,000 in revenue, so it's a 30,000, but it's supposed to be 25. I think that was maybe a typo.
20, and it should be 25 under public art? No, that's the...
So 5415 shows their total, their total expenses would be 42,124, and then we're estimating the revenue at 12,000. So that would mean a $30,000 subsidy. I think that's actually supposed to be 17 in revenue, so we can make that correction. So any other...
You're talking about line 3804 should go from 12 to 17?
Yes, that should be 17.
And that's anticipated revenue?
Yes, so any revenue that they bring in over that would just go into their foundation account. So we're basically saying the subsidy will be $25,000. So their revenue will make up what the expense is over $25,000. Does that make sense?
Even if they make more than the 17, we're still subsidizing the 25, so
Yes.
they can have more in their fund balance.
Yes.
Does that answer? or
That's been the
clarify?
current policy we're bringing forward from years past, so. Any other questions?
I'm not.
Does that make sense?
I'm not convinced you're convinced.
I'm getting there. So I see two, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
5414 and 5415.
Right. So right now, we're just on the 5415, which is the general fund department.
Okay,
And that's the one the $25,000 subsidy.
We could
that's fine.
move on to 5414 right now.
We're about to.
Again, another
Yes.
segue.
Thank you.
Any questions about 15 before we go to 14? Okay, seeing none.
Okay.
5414.
Okay, so this is the Public Art Program Fee Fund. So this is a Special Revenue Fund 20, and the department is 5414. So this is the 1% valuation on commercial projects. That was the ordinance that you passed about a year ago. And any commercial project that comes in for building permits are assessed a 1% valuation. They can choose to move that money into and just make the in lieu fee pay the in lieu fee, or they can place art. To date, we haven't had anybody place art yet, but we're working on that. So the total budget for this is $10,000, which was similar to last year. The expenses that we spend under here have to be specific to the Yountville Outdoor Art Walk. So it could be the new pads, it could be the stipend for the sculptures or other materials, or maintenance fees, or printing costs of the map, that type of thing. Our expected revenues, which are quite reserved right now at $20,400. We have so money, when they come in and they pay the fee, the money goes into what I kind of think of as an escrow account. So it's holding there until they decide to place art or they receive their certificate of occupancy, and at that point then the money is then moved into the actual account for expenses. Right now that escrow account has upwards of $90,000 in it because of all of the different permits that we have out. So RH, a lot going on at Vintage Bellagio, and who else? We have a lot of building permits. Jessup Cellars and handwritten.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I would say on this is we're being very conservative on the estimated revenues. Samantha and I will be working to kind of close out some of those. But again, this is a restricted revenue fund because managed by the Arts Commission, the costs have to be directly related to the maintenance, oversight, placement of the Public Art Fund. So it can pay for maintenance, collateral, staff time, various things like that, purchase, acquisition, but it is restricted to the Public Art Fund,
So
Public Art Walk.
just as an aside, to close the loop on the holding escrow account that Sam mentioned, I think that's a really good way to describe it. The reason that you don't see $90,000 in here in a beginning fund balance is because those are held in there until the project is complete. The project, if you will, reserves the right to make that decision until the very end. And so then when they decide they are not going to place art, then those funds get transferred, and Sam does a really good job of working with staff, and then it rolls into this fund balance, and then it's available. So,
and if they choose to place art, then they go through a process with the Yountville Arts Commission, and then they are basically repaid or given their feedback, however much it costs them to place that art. So it's very much a holding account until that process, that loop has been closed.
Yeah.
So.
Councilmember Dorman, I believe, had a question.
Thank you. So the budget of $10,000, all of that's coming from the 1% fee, right?
Yes.
That is not town funded.
No.
Correct. That's not your general
In
fund.
this,
That's why I
this
say
specific category here is all that
this
money
is
generated.
right, and that's
This is the
why
art-
we've created
Art walk
this.
money.
Yes.
Public
It's a-
art money.
Yeah.
It's a restricted fund for this purpose only.
Thank you.
Councilmember Durham?
So then what fund would purchase the sidewalk judge if that's the discussion?
This fund could operate in that manner. It could be for acquiring future permanent art for the town.
And who makes that decision? The Arts Commission?
So the Arts Commission can recommend something for purchase, but only the council can approve a permanent piece of art coming to town. So anything that we take on as permanent, like Chaos Pamplona or the Chef, would come before the council for approval.
Thank you very much.
And an example would be if an amount of that 90,000 turns into real money, that could go toward the purchase of that piece or a new piece.
Mm-hmm. It could
And
be
it could
used for
Either in
also,
whole or in
it
part.
can build, and again, it could also offset, because we want to remind everybody, the 25,000 general fund, I'm going back to the other fund, you know, the Arts Commission does a lot of programming that is not just the Art Walk, and that's been one of the growth areas of the Arts Commission in terms of Shakespeare in the Park, the receptions at the gallery programming, the Out Loud events. And so, you know, I just want to say that this will allow them, kind of when the Public Works Director was talking to you about The general fund won't have to pay as much as it used to on streets because of the SB1. The Arts Commission and the Arts Fund will not need to put as much of the money that they've been raising into the Public Art Walk because that will be addressed over time by the Art Fee Fund. So it's going to give us some options, but I also want to say that they're stepping up and doing more programming and more activity, and many of those do not have the same level of revenue offset because, again, most all of the events that the Arts Commission sponsors, we view them as an augment to our Park and Rec programming. So
Generally, they're free.
Right. Any other? Is there, no? Okay, youth subsidy?
So youth subsidy is Special Revenue Fund 80, and so there is no budget for this youth subsidy fund, but we did want to include, we have to include it for the next several years just for transparency's sake. So this is one of the funds that will transition to the Town of Yountville Community Foundation, and that board will take over administration and oversight. So youth subsidy is our program for low-income families that allows them to apply for scholarship to utilize our Parks and Recreation services. So the majority of the money that we give out every year goes to residents of Yountville to participate in our after-school program. That's the largest draw that we have from youth subsidy, and then summer camp, and then use of the community pool. Right now, we're estimating the year-end transfer to be just under $32,000 is what is in that account. So you'll see that transfer out, and then you won't see any balance, or any transactions or anything from that going forward, but it'll be a placeholder, I believe, for a couple of years, or they show it in the budget for a few years. Mm-hmm. Any questions on youth subsidy?
No.
Okay.
That does it for the Parks and Recreation section.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Agency Fund, Tourism Improvement District Assessment.
Sorry. Give me 1 second. Okay.
A lot of papers over there.
Yeah, you too many. Well, I'm going to start with risk management. It is known as the Napa Valley Tourism Improvement District, which is a special agency fund that is a collection of as a part of our TOT rates. And I think I left it on my desk. Can I see this?
You don't have it memorized?
I have a lot of it memorized. So the expected revenues are estimated.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
Thank you. I was so prepared.
Teamwork.
Okay. So the estimated revenues are 1.1 million, and $839,666 is allocated as part of the county pass-through. And then we have $283,333, which is allocated to the local TID, in which we, the board meets and decides on how to best use those funds, striving to put heads in beds during the off seasons. There's also a 1% administrative fee, which is $11,000 that does come back to the town as an administrative fee for essentially doing the legwork for this program. Currently, we don't have anything budgeted to spend as of yet. We are meeting this week to establish our budget for this fiscal year and whether or not the board decides to pursue any additional funding allocations. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Are there any? Yes? No? Yes. Councilmember Durham.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry.
At what point could we ask to see just a list of what, I know it's not the town doing it, I mean the government, but at what point is it appropriate to ask for what the money's being utilized for?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you get an annual report.
We
Okay.
do bring you an annual report. Usually
you.
it's in the fall.
Thank you.
End of
Okay.
summer, beginning of
And the
fall.
public, there are public meetings.
And they are public
Yeah, yeah.
meetings, and I'm happy to forward any information to you.
Thank you.
I think, just to briefly on that, once they approve their budget, most of the budget expenditures right now are, they pay for a TripAdvisor page that's devoted to Yountville. They have a contract with the Yountville Chamber of Commerce for social media and marketing. And then they also have a contribution to the Chamber's broader marketing program and effort with managed by Marion Carson. And then they have some small fees. They've, for example, provide a small amount of funding to the Arts Commission for Art Sip and Stroll, which is the official Yountville Arts in April event. And then they provided some grants, one-time grants, and the body goes back and forth every year on evaluating the grants to nonprofits. This year they included a sizable sum of money in the $30,000 range for the Lincoln Theater, $10,000 for the Vine Trail.
We did some
the
increased marketing for
10,000.
fire.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
and we had the fire marketing. They used their reserves for that. And then we also have the Napa Valley Museum had a grant as well as a startup grant for the Yountville Short Film Festival. So that portion of their, they wrestle every year with that and what the recipients are and who's going to do that. And they're also looking at some, this year, for the first time, and I'm kind of excited about it, the chair has some ideas that he wants to talk about in terms of from the lodging perspective. And as Councilmember Durham pointed out, basically you see this in our budget because it's an expenditure out, but we don't have, the town does not have control or approval of the expenditures. Those are at the determination and sole discretion within the program definition of the governing board, which is a 7-member governing board that includes 4 lodging representatives, 2 town positions, currently 1 from the town manager's office and 1 from the council, with the mayor serving as that designee, and 1 chamber representative. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, comments? No? Debt service funds.
Okay, well, we're getting almost to the end here. So this slide just summarizes the planned payments to cover the town's debt. This was covered at the beginning of our presentation. So we refinanced our 2008 lease revenue bonds, and so we saved a little bit less than $120,000 this year, but ongoing we're going to save about $120,000 annually. So those we are no longer going to be reporting on. You'll see them for history purposes only. And then we've got the new bonds, which replaced the 2008 bonds, and we made 1 interest payment this year, and next year we're budgeting to pay $544,144. And then we've got the Town Hall Madison Yacht lease revenue bonds from 2013, and payments are budgeted at $313,000. Measure A came with, the benefit of the Measure A tax also resulted in us taking on some debt, which was also covered through the proceeds that we received from the county. So as the tax will sunset, we've also made our final payment. What we're doing is just doing final bookkeeping. So the county still owes us payments because they don't pay in advance until all the sales tax revenue is collected. We're going to clean all of that up. We've got some holding accounts that they're requiring us to keep for proper use of any revenues that are remaining. So portions of the fund balance in this fund, which is Fund 76, and will be paid in full, will go to the Capital Maintenance Fund 76 for the flood barrier maintenance, and then any other proceeds that come from Measure A that are extra in excess because we've already finished the flood wall project will go in another holding account, which we will use only for maintenance and report to the county auditor controller by their request. So this does conclude our presentation for the budget.
Before you get there, Any questions about the debt services?
Thank you.
I did want to just ask for you to clarify, because I think this came up when the bonds were refinanced. That's not $120,000 that is now available to allocate elsewhere, that we are saving. It can be a little misleading. This is money we don't have to pay in the future.
Correct.
Can you just explain the difference between, now we have 120 to spend somewhere else?
Well,
We don't.
Well, so we just basically, we've reduced our expenses. So when we talked earlier, I think it was when Sam was presenting, our budget is a financial plan for our costs and our revenues. And so this is really a report about how our costs have changed as a result of a refinance. And so we are just providing less burden to the general fund, if you will.
Interest payment. It's an interest payment that won't be made.
Or
If
less
you,
of it?
I would,
Less of an interest
slightly less, yep.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to look at it. Yes.
Okay.
Another way to simply look at it is if we hadn't made that effort, you would have continued to pay $569,000 a year because that would have been what you committed to. So by refinancing, it does give you broader options in terms of your overall
We
budget.
were paying 668.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we cut down the costs, the expenses, yes.
We did,
Good.
yes. So this does conclude our presentation. I do want to say that today you heard a lot of information about our general fund, but you've also heard about restricted funds and impact fees and special agency funds. And one of the reasons we've slowly transitioned to this kind of matrix presentation is because many of our programs and departments we don't operate in silos. We're a small organization. There's this sort of intersection. Sam operates special agency funds and Sandra works with impact fees and all these different allocations. So it makes more sense, at least in my mind or in our minds, to give you a comprehensive presentation by manager and director of the areas that they touch and the plans that we have. And so that's why we sort of did jog from general fund to special agency funds and things of that nature. So I hope that was okay. We're certainly willing to accept any of your input or feedback on the presentation and what you need more of or what you need less of. But for now, this concludes our presentation for this segment of the budget. We do have a second, or what is really a third workshop on May 22nd from 1 to 3:30 here in the chambers, so that we can just cover the rest of our budget, which is our capital projects fund and the repair and replacement funds that we have set up within the capital projects fund, and then our enterprise funds, which operate a little differently than the general fund and the special agency funds and restricted funds. And so you'll be hearing about those at that time. Between now and then, we'll be working to make any kind of typographical errors, formatting issues, corrections that were noted today, and we'll be working to compile a final document for adoption later in June.
If I remember correctly, the only real adjustment we're talking about is that $10,000 small projects.
That's correct.
Oh, there's
Money
a
that
second
went-
one. There's also the increase from 12 to 17 and the arts
Well, that was a
fund.
correction.
Yeah,
That wasn't.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
We just increased
We're
that.
putting both is because
Right.
we factored
Those
both
are
of
the two
those into
adjustments.
the details.
Yes,
Okay.
that's
I
correct.
just also want to really compliment Maria and the management team, because we took to heart the council's challenge to try to present to you the budget in a different way than we have. So we definitely do want to hear your feedback. We think we're giving you a high level, but we're also, we want to welcome you to, if you have individual questions about the budget or something, we certainly want to hear them from you. But we have covered a lot of information in a short period of time.
Yes, and now I get to ask the council if they have any questions or additional comments. Councilmember Moeller?
Yes, I have a question about the Gantt limit. So,
Yes.
because now we've got the big numbers in our head, is that going to come back as a separate administrative item, or are we going to get a little tease about what those numbers, where we currently are and what we probably need to raise them to?
So we thank you for asking me about that, because I had meant to bring it up and I had forgotten. So you are going to receive a presentation before the council on May 15th, so that we can kind of go over what the Gantt limit is publicly, what we're looking at, what proposals we have for you with some options. I'm available to meet with you offline individually if you'd like to go over things in more detail and what's been done historically and where we are to date. The Gantt limit is also part of the budget and it's part of the adopted resolutions. So you'll hear about it a little bit more this year because we're getting ready to bring forward ballot initiative language for your approval, and we need your authority to continue pursuing that work. So, yes.
Don't we have to make a decision somehow by June to get it on the November ballot?
Yes, and
Okay.
so we'll come to you, and
Okay.
it will come
I
to you.
just don't want to cut it too close, you never know.
No,
but-
that's okay. We'll come
Okay.
to you on May 15th to initially discuss and get your direction and approval, and then we'll come back to you in June with final approval for everything.
And I think just, we've got that all scheduled, and it should be no surprise to you or the community that we're one of those unique communities where our revenue base has grown tremendously from when the early stages. And really for us, the GAN limit is how do we, we need voter approval to use the increased level of revenue received from our visitors, because if we don't approve it, it also means funding goes away, and then you have a very different budget discussion. So it's really a polite way of asking our residents, can we please use the revenue generated by our visitors through TOT and sales tax? And it should be no surprise to you that the limit needs to go up when we start looking at just the cost of the cost of things and the revenue generation. So you will be seeing a more thoughtful presentation on, one, what the GAN limit is, and an explanation of why we need to do that.
And historically, our public's been
We've
very
had-
kind and
we
come
have
up
had
with
a
high
very-
70 to almost 80% approval, so.
And it's really,
Because we
I mean,
explain
is
it well.
It's a fairly simple, straightforward thing.
It's difficult to understand why it isn't 100% approval, to be honest, but.
Yep, agree, but still.
And we can only increase that limit so much, which is why we have to do this so frequently, frankly.
Well,
It's a very
actually-
good problem to have, additional revenue coming in.
State law requires us to do it every 4 years.
Yeah.
What we're unique is there's probably about 30 to 40 cities statewide that it's of matter. I mean, a lot of agencies have an adopted GAN limit, and it's not applicable because their expenditure ratios based on, but again, we're generating, 60+% of our general fund revenue comes directly from TOT. So I just want to say, we're basically, again, getting voter approval to use the revenues. This is not a tax increase. It's just the authorization to use the revenue that is brought in.
One other way to think about this, for folks watching at home or listening in, is that other communities who receive the same amount of revenue via property tax, which we do not as a result of just the number of residents that we have and the number of homes that we have, is those municipalities do not need to go to their voters to ask, can we spend your property tax dollars to pay for public safety and provide clean water and clean your roads and streets? And we do. But that's just because of the nature of our revenue structure. So,
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Councilmember Dorman?
Thank you. Is it, maybe you already have this, or is it possible to create, I like the new presentation a lot, but I would also like to see an overall picture, for example, and let's just use our town manager as an example. You're like 0.025 to some department and 0.3, like a list by employee that we have of how they're parceled out to each of our departments.
We can do that and include that in the final budget.
And also a list by department, sort of the inverse of that, a list by department of, and I guess we have it for a number of these in here, but I don't think we have it for all of them, of the pieces of employees that go into them. I know we have some tables in here that says, we have 0.25 of this, but I don't know that it's for everyone.
So we have it for every single department that has full-time staff allocations. Thank you. We have it for every single department that has full-time staff allocations. We've not yet moved into allocating FTEs for part-timers because part-timers aren't FT. Well, it's just, they're different. But we do have the allocation summary for every department. So I must be missing something that you'd like to see.
No, I'm just not sure there was a table for every account we discussed today, and I'm sure there exists such a table somewhere. And then the other one of splitting out finance manager goes is allocated X, town manager. So I'd just like to be able to have all that to look at.
We have a
reference.
master document that feeds all these allocations. That first item you'd like is very easy to get. The only thing that I would recommend is not listing the employee name, and we can list it by employee title.
That's fine.
If that's okay. And then for the list by department on the allocations, I'll go back and look at all your attachments, make sure we didn't miss anything. That's good feedback. The only thing that I would say is that if you didn't have staff allocations in there, it's because it's either only part-time employees or there is actually no physical personnel costs to it, or we missed something. But I will check.
And it could be that. It could be that they're all part-time or there's nobody's allocated to it.
We'll
And
take a
that's
look.
good for me to know, too, that it would be a zero allocation.
And I always like it when you have questions about what you'd like to see more of. We finance people are guilty of always trying to reorganize information in multiple different ways, and we don't want to overwhelm you. But we do have some new sheets that we'll be including in the general fund summary section that rolls costs up sort of at a higher level, but with some detail. So I think you'll enjoy seeing those, and I'll point those out to you once our budget is published. We're working on them now.
Thank you.
I'm just quickly going through here. Parks and Rec has all those staff allocations listed.
A lot of them do.
Planning and Building, I'm just looking very quickly, doesn't. Yes, it does. There are some subcategories of Planning and Building, like Housing Grant Fund, and
That's because they don't have personnel
right,
charges.
because there isn't an individual
Correct.
call out of that.
Correct.
It's kind of inconsequential in the overall allocation of staff.
Right, and one of the things that we do, for example, with grant funds and things like that, we try to really leverage the money to really go where it belongs, which means the general fund subsidizes the time spent on those projects and programs so that the actual resident benefits from the dollars there.
Right.
That makes sense.
And it could be, so the staff allocations in the org charts are after the budget line. So I don't know if maybe there was a place where you didn't see it because it was after the budget, but that's where all of the staff allocations were that I saw.
And I think Maria, you may have answered my question because like information technology and telecommunications didn't have the allocation, but you're saying that's because there's not a physical.
No.
So I think that may be
Correct.
what I'm not seeing anything. I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
Well,
So,
Yeah, thank you for asking.
I'm seeing, the allocations of costs in the IT section, but you're talking specific of staff.
Correct, and I think
Right.
this goes back a little bit also to Councilmember Durham's question, which was, how do you get 1.1?
Right.
Because in some cases, the full person plus a portion, and I will share that the administration is generally, some of the departments will we're referred to as administrative burden, because our costs get charged back out to some of the other departments. So you're going to see that more. And the same thing like in Public Works, you will see the Public Works Director distributed amongst all of those. So I think the idea of a summary on some of those master ones is good. Just one last closing thought on allocations. We also review those every budget. Sometimes, and when you see, that's why you see in the phrase the allocation, because if when we have a movement or something, it may result in that allocation changing. That person may be moving some of their emphasis to another area. So we do go through that. We don't try to change it every year, but but we do fundamentally look at it to make sure that if staff resources are being allocated to the appropriate area.
thank you.
I think we'll probably find that your explanation is going to cover everybody that isn't listed somewhere.
I think on that part, and then we can do a broader summary of the key positions, because many of your department heads and your management team are distributed over a lot of areas.
Any last thoughts or questions? So, hearing no others, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our special budget workshop to our next regular meeting, which is Tuesday, May 15th. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And right at 12 noon, or 11:59 at least, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff.
Welcome.